Hello and welcome back to DriveDriverDriven. My name is Humble and I haven't seen you guys in a bit. Through no fault of my own, really. Just things have been busy, work's been busy, and everything's been hurry up and wait for the new project, which is kind of what this is. We're going to build a GBS Zero, Great British Sportscars Zero. It's basically a Lotus 7 clone, and this is kind of the kickoff for that project. I had announced it on the channel earlier. We had gone to the UK, we visited the factory, met up with Richard and Anthony and a whole bunch of guys there. Just everyone was awesome. So awesome, in fact, I ended up taking a car home for delivery, but I had them do a whole bunch of work for the kit itself so that I wouldn't have to do it, including getting a bunch of the donor parts together, getting those donor parts refurbished or R&R'd so they're ready to go. And then now the kit's on its way here. I'm filming this on the 24th of November, and the kit should be here early December. It sucks that we're going to miss it for the Thanksgiving break, but I think we'll be building it over Christmas break, and this build's going to go fast. I don't know quite how I'm going to film it just yet, because we're going to have a whole bunch of people over who wanted to partake in this build because they missed out on the last one. So I'll do my best to put a camera on as many people as possible, and it might just be narrating the build after the fact, because there isn't much to this car. So for the Zero project, this is really dialing back everything. It's nowhere near as powerful as the Ultima. Its limits are nowhere near the Ultima's, and that's a good thing. My friend Sean keeps calling me Icarus for flying too close to the sun, but actually there's a little bit of truth to that. Is the Ultima, its limits are like 11 out of 10, and there's only one place that you can explore even close to those limits, and that's on a racetrack. And it's just not a street car. It's not a street-friendly car. And I wanted something that I could go out and have fun with on the street, go and cruise the mountains, run down by the ocean, and just really, really enjoy. And I've always wanted a Lotus 7 or like a low cost or a Lotus 7 clone. And it's, this dream is finally coming to fruition. I really like the Zero BS of the car. It really is 2 seats, a steering wheel, and some wheels and an engine. And that's about it. There's no nothing. There's no doors. There's no radio. There's no heater. There's nothing. It's just you, the car, and the elements, which is perfect. That's like the quintessential British sports car experience. And that's really, really what I was after. So right now I'll take you through what I've got here already, and what we're going to do today. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the project as we go. So the poor Ultima, as you can see, is just kind of relegated to the back of the garage while we wait for all the parts for it. This is what I've picked up for our engine and transmission. So this is a Ford Duratec. It's from a 2008 Ford Focus. And fortunately, this car was a manual car, as indicated by the clutch assembly and flywheel there. The transmission is from a 2009 or 2008 Mazda MX-5 or a Mazda Miata. That is the NC generation, the 3rd gen. Why these two particular things is this is the Ford Duratec, but it was also known as the Mazda MZR. And the big difference between the two is this is the intake side, actually. On the exhaust, actually I think on both sides, I think the MZR had a larger exhaust port and a larger intake port that filled up this opening a bit more. Stop that from falling, or not. And on the Mazdas, they have a larger intake port. On the Fords, it's a little bit smaller. If you get the 2-liter size, which is what this is, all of the MZR and the Ford Duratec 2.3-liter and 2-liter engines, I believe, came with a forged crank, and the 2.5-liter engines, which look identical on the outside, came with a cast crank. Specifically because the 2.5-liter engines never had a boosted application versus the 2-liter and the 2.3, they did. The reason in particular I went with like a Ford instead of the Mazda is because they fall out of trees. Ford used this engine in everything, in a 1.8, a 2.0, and a 2.3. Every Focus or Fusion or Escape or whatever, they all came with this engine as a base option, and then it just went up from there. So I picked this engine up for $400 shipped to my doorstep. If I went to a yard, I could pick this up for around $220 if I pulled it myself. So it's just hard to beat in terms of pricing. And they are very tunable, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The transmission is from like I said, Mazda MX-5, the Miata. This one only had 16,000 miles on it. It looks pretty much new. It shifts very tight. It won't fall over. I mean, it still feels like a new transmission, and I'm really, really happy about that. As you can see, I've already stripped the engine mostly down. One of the things we're going to address with this transmission is actually the clutch fork in there. Now, in the Zero, this bell housing is pretty large, and it fills up the tunnel pretty effectively. And there is not enough room on the chassis for this clutch fork that sticks out the side in the slave cylinder. You can either clearance the chassis, clearance the clutch fork, or a little bit of both. But what I wanted to do is actually convert it to an annular hydraulic bearing, which is what this setup is. So this guy, well, let's start at the base. So this kit is from Vitesse. Can't even get it off there. And this is the front seal for the transmission that would go around the input shaft. This is their adapter, which is concentric and very nicely machined, and it fits right over there to make sure this is concentric. And then this throwout bearing is actually from like a Land Rover or a Volvo. It's an off-the-shelf part, which is what I like. I like my wear items to be easily attainable. And so that just goes on like so. And then this whole assembly goes inside of the bell housing, where this piece does the job of our throwout bearing as well as our clutch. Is this assembly here is normally in operation. It'll be pushed back, and then hydraulic engagement will push that up and release the clutch. So I'm really looking forward to this, because I think it makes the transmission much easier to install. This little bit goes on the top to bleed it, and again, like super, super easy. So I mentioned how tunable the Duratec is, and again, like these engines are ubiquitous. They're just all over the place. And the more I learn about them, the more excited I am to really get into it. These were used a lot in road racing, road rally cars, etc. Updating or backdating various cars. The 2-liter, for instance, you can find parts from Cosworth, from Mountoon, a whole bunch of vendors stateside, actually. I've already gotten a whole bunch of bits for the engine build. And like I said, I learned after the fact that the crank is forged, but I had already purchased a new crank. I'll get into one of the reasons later to identify the difference between the two, but it comes down to how the timing is attached to the crank with these engines. Other things I did is like upgrading forged rods and new bearings and a set of cams and springs and really getting into the top end rebuild of the engine, because the goal is I wanted to have a really fun car with about 220, 230 horsepower, and that's very doable with a built Duratec. In fact, you could go way, way over that, and I'm choosing to dial it back a bit, which I know for me doesn't sound like much, but I want something that's as rock solid as the Ultima was, in terms of like just fire and forget. I could get in that car, go racing. I raced all year, and yeah, I blew up in the end, but I knew that motor was hurt and I was pushing my luck. So I want the same kind of fire and forget reliability out of the GBS Zero. I want to be able to do nothing with it other than like oil changes and regular maintenance and not have to worry about anything else. And I think these parts in this engine build will get me there. So that's sort of where we're at now. The kit's going to arrive very soon, and I'm going to get to pulling this motor apart behind me, and I'll pick up the camera again once I have it apart, and I'll show you some of the things that concerned me and why I pulled it apart in the first place. Yeah, sorry. I started tearing the engine apart, and I got into a groove, and now it's done. Let me show you what I found, though, and this engine looks pretty cherry, to be honest. All right, let's start with the block here. If you look down in the journals, I wiped them off with my finger, but aside from maybe the center journal, there's a little bit of wear there, but not crazy. And the rest of these look pretty dang good. Keep in mind, this motor had 73,000 miles on it. Here's the girdle with all the bearing halves on the other side. And again, these all look pretty good, given the engine's age. On the crank itself, again, this is a forged crank, but you don't see any discoloration, anything like a spun bearing previously. If you look at the crank from the Ultima, I mean, it's obvious that there's a stark difference between the two, and the Ultima's got lots of discoloration from its problems, but this one, the crank out of the Duratec, looks fantastic. Looking up here from the head, inside the chambers, nice bronze color. I don't see a whole lot of buildup. This doesn't look bad at all. The cams, let's get the fuel injectors out of the way. The cams, all the lobes look pretty decent. I didn't see any abnormal wear. On the same with the pistons, like they all had pretty uniform burn marks, combustion on them. No, they didn't have tons of buildup, tons of carbon on them. Even the bearing halves inside on the rods, like some minor wear on either side, but that's about as bad as it got. Like, this engine looks amazing for as old as it was. I think this engine could have gone at least twice this far and, just been fine. I'm not seeing a ton of worrisome wear. So I'm back on the block here. Like, it's just stunning, like how good this motor was for as old as it was. Again, this was out of a 2008 Focus that looked like by its Carfax that it had been an Uber or a Lyft or something like that. Like, it racked up a ton of mileage really fast, and whoever owned this car was religious with its services, and like clockwork, every 10,000 miles it went back to the dealership. and it shows. Like the bearings look fantastic. So not much actual work on film, just kind of the aftermath of that work, because I forgot to set up the GoPro to do a time lapse. But next up, I want to finish cleaning this block and cleaning up the head, and I need to send a borescope. Actually, we don't even need a borescope. Let's take a look at it right now. What I want to do is look at the bores on the block here and see how they looked. One-handed. Just a little wipe down. Yeah, it's just some grime and some dirt. So this motor was pulled from the car in 2011, and it sat somewhere. I don't think it sat outside, because here on the side of the block, you don't see a lot of corrosion. Like normally you would see this kind of aluminum oxide corrosion, and you just don't see it at all. So this would have been the front of the car, this side in the Focus. And yeah, you get a little grime build up here and there, but again, this motor, it sat somewhere, maybe in a warehouse. But, you know, it doesn't look half bad for a $400 engine. In fact, it looks fantastic for a $400 engine. We'll just see if we can clean up these bores and get going on the rebuild. So I think that kind of does it for this kind of first step on the GBS build. You're going to start to see some more videos coming at a regular cadence again as we get that project in, get it off the ground, and we're going to get this engine built. We're going to get the engine and transmission together for a test. So for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.